I'm outside the Greenwood Theatre in South London, right next to Guy's Hospital. It was built by a bequest, they say, that was meant to provide an operating theatre. Instead, they got an actors' theatre. Not that it made much difference, because the scalpel has been wielded here. It was 25 years ago that the first edition of Question Time, political debate with the public, took place here. And you could say that since then the politicians have learnt what it's like to be cut up.
What's the matter with you? Where did you get all that weight?
I think landslides, on the whole, don't produce successful governments.
Arithmetic was never John's strong point. He hasn't
I resign, John. You're very unlikely ever to get a job, aren't you?
No one expected the new programme to last. It was designed simply to fill a gap in the schedules. But now, 846 editions later, Question Time is almost a national institution.
Hello, and here we are for the first of our weekly Question Times with an audience in a South London theatre which has been specially converted for television. That's to say the theatre has been specially converted, not the audience. The audience are much the same people as they were when they came in. They're what's described in TV circles as real people to distinguish them from people who work in television.
Sir Robin Day was the first chairman of Question Time, and on his first panel, Edna O'Brien, Teddy Taylor, Michael Foot, and Archbishop Derek Warlock of Liverpool, and of course an audience determined from the very start to have their say.
The trial judge recommended that the IRA terrorists who murdered my aunt in a London restaurant should serve a minimum of 30 years. Should they be released earlier if the arms are handed over?
How does the panel view the Lord Chief Justice's view that Britain is going to the dogs?
They're talking about massive rent increases in council houses, and now they're talking about stopping building them. You're very biased against council tenants.
What do you think of what they've said? Do you think they're a lot of smug fuddy-duddies?
Well, they seem very complimentary about the question, but they haven't actually given me any answers.
But the best sport was the first time a cabinet minister risked coming on in programme number 3.
And the Right Honourable Michael Heseltine MP, Secretary of State for the Environment in Mrs Thatcher's cabinet, who is well known for cutting almost everything except his hair.
The very interesting thing about Question Time, above all else, of all the programmes I ever appeared on, the one that I knew would always provoke, oh, I saw you last night on the telly, was Question Time.
Instead of declaring that it does not want confrontation with the unions, shouldn't the government have a showdown and cut the unions down to size without further delay?
I think the answer to that question in the terms... I was actually about to start doing that. Now, I understand that the left are very reluctant to listen to any answers, but I do intend to answer this question in my words and not in the words they try to put in my mouth.
I think the reason why Question Time, when it started, was such an extraordinary success was because politicians didn't, on the whole, deign to speak as normal human beings to ordinary hoi polloi.
It would have been extraordinarily curious if a government which was elected with the votes of about 40% of the British trade unionists should want to have a showdown with the unions.
I was a huge fan of Question Time and would watch it every week. And I wasn't alone. I'd come back to school the following morning and me and my mates would discuss who'd been on the night before. My politics tutor, I think, had an in with one of the programme's producers and managed to secure a small batch of tickets, so I went along with a couple of my mates.
I'm going to ask for a question now from Toby Young of Islington, who is a student. Mr. Young, could I have your question, please?
In view of the government's decision to scrap the Endurance before the crisis arose, how does the panel think Britain will be able to afford to maintain the defence of the Falkland Islands?
There's something very idealistic about Question Time. It's democracy in action, in which this well-informed group of citizens debate the issues of the day in a sort of intelligent way, and hold kind of their elected representatives to account.
To begin with, Question Time was based in London, but over the years it's become more mobile, now going all over the UK and beyond. Good evening and welcome to this week's Question Time, which comes from Birmingham, Truro, Brighton, Belfast, Bournemouth, Edinburgh, Stockton-on-Tees, Cardiff, Dundee, Lerwick, New York, Sydney, Abu Dhabi, Bristol, where our audience is ready as ever to test the wits of our guests here on the panel. The lady in the front here. You don't have to take your hat off, ma'am.
Which one is Mr. Roger Freeman?
Well, would Roger Freeman own up, please? He's sitting on the right here.
How many jobs have he got?
Go on, Mr. Freeman, how many jobs have you got?
Chancellor for the Duchess of Lancaster, Minister for Public Service, and Citizen Charter, Member of Kittens? Little ones for leggets or big ones?
Member of Parliament for Kettering. Well,
Accountant, Farmer, Transport Minister. What's the matter with you? Where did you get all that
Okay, we should spread your jobs around a bit.
No wonder you don't care about the young people and old pensioners. You got thousands, I got to live on 3,000 a year. Wait a minute.
No. I think you must let him answer.
And you put the same
You must let him answer that point now.
on me as you put on yourself.
Okay.
Where is the justice?
Mr. Freeman,
some of you ought to shut yourselves.
I think you're a candidate for the House of Commons.
I have never thought the Question Time audience was a soft touch, actually. Right from the beginning, they always make it clear whether they support you or not by clapping. And so I don't think that there's ever been an audience which just sits there quietly and lets politicians get away with anything.
Yeah, I am rather touched at Mrs. Williams. The same Mrs. Williams that before Stevenage dumped her in the 1979 election was on Grunwick's picket line and did nothing to bring in laws which, as Mrs. Thatcher's brought in, have allowed miners to choose exactly which union they want to belong to.
Do I get a chance to respond to that?
Yes, indeed.
Right. Number one, sir, when I was on the Grunwick picket line, there was no violence of any kind, and I make no apology for it. I have at home 10 apologies from cabinet ministers in the Conservative government for having suggested I had anything to do with violence at any time.
I didn't say you had anything to do with
violence.
violence.
You mentioned this. No, you didn't, but you gave a very clear insinuation which is untrue.
No, I did not.
And I'm entitled to say it's untrue because I know it's untrue. And secondly, my party...
Was this the Labour Party or was this the SDP?
SDP, and don't be cheap. One of the reasons I left the Labour Party was because I didn't believe that
because
people
you lost
should have
your
block
seat
votes
and you knew you
for
were
the
going to be
leadership.
deselected.
Oh, come. Don't be so foolish. I didn't leave the Labour Party in 1979, as you ought to know. I left it in 1981, 2 years later, because I didn't like the block.
Hold on, Shelley. What the young gentleman is trying to get from
Well, the young gentleman is being very personal, and he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I'm afraid democracy consists. Democracy consists of other people whom you and I don't think know what they're talking about.
Well, I know you don't.
The audiences for Question Time have become much more articulate because they're Question Time people these days. I think originally the audience came along as they might come along to any other programme, but now they are much more self-confident, much more articulate, know the rules of the game, and get rather bad-tempered if the panel takes more time than they think the audience is getting.
I'm a pensioner, and I'm disgusted with the way pensioners are being asked to pay for the economy of the country.
No, you're wrong, sir. You're wrong.
It's not my figures, it's the government figures, the Roundtree
I shall certainly claim credit for the fact that since 1979, the man on average earnings has seen his real take-home pay rise by £80 a week in today's values.
I'm grateful to you because you clearly don't actually need a microphone to be heard from the back there, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. No.
I'm used to shouting the odds for pensioners. There's not many people doing it.
No one is attending public meetings anymore. That
tradition has gone, of that sort of oratory and that sort of meeting the public and the public actually ask questions. You know, even when they do the hustings at election time, it's usually 3 or 4 people in a market town and a bloke with a megaphone. You know, there's not much of that left. But what we have got left is question time.
It's not just the panellists who get it in the neck. Watch out when the audience turn on each other.
And I think we should thank the Americans for defending Muslims, not only in Iraq, but also in Kosovo. No. The Americans are defending Muslims in Iraq, they're defending Muslims in Kosovo. They set up the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians have an authority. They defended the Muslims in Kuwait.
Let him finish his point.
On behalf of the Muslims, don't you dare speak on behalf of the Muslims. You have no idea.
Why didn't you? Why
You have
don't you
no
attack the
idea.
Russians?
Don't even speak. Don't.
Why don't you attack the Russians when they launched an all-out assault on the Chechen based on a terrorist outreach? I never heard you. I never heard you.
All right, hold on.
The left is silent when it comes to Russia. It's silent when it comes to Russia. It's silent when it comes to Chinese persecution.
You've made your point. You've made your point.
My impression now is that they throw it open to the audience much more than they used to. You know, it's become even more democratic. You know, the public get even more of a say than they did before, and that you know, no bad thing.
I am Iraqi. I am Kurdish. In past 30 years, I have seen so much tragic. No human being in this world ever witnessed this firsthand. This is a war. This isn't a picnic.
For me, it was the first time in my entire life I have ever had that opportunity to go face to face to those people.
Every single day, every single hour, I get the update news from Iraq. Does anyone ask us, how do you feel?
Go on, I'm asking.
We want this war more than anything on this planet.
I totally sympathise with you, but I think it's very, very important. I do sympathise. Please don't tell me that I don't know and I don't know.
She wants to ask, let her ask you a question.
Could you look at my eyes? Could you look at my eyes? I've been in a prison repeatedly raped. You haven't got a clue. You just you haven't got a clue.
Sorry, I'm sorry, this is just emotional blackmail.
Excuse me.
I went back to Kurdistan and I was stopped by people and they say, oh, they have seen my interviews, they have seen the question time. One of their comment was a Kurdish Prime Minister, Nechirvan Barzani, say, I saw you in that program, I was really proud.
Over the years, Question Time has had a number of chairmen, but the one who set the standard for everyone to follow was Robin Day.
There we are, and here we go.
Its initial success was built and based on Robin Day. And what people liked was how Robin comported himself, what he said, how he dealt with politicians. They liked him having a hard time sometimes from politicians, but always winning in the end.
I'm not in favour of abortion for what is called social reasons. Let me go on, since you want me to be precise. By social reasons...
Don't necessarily be precise by going on. Obfuscation is an art form.
Well, you must make up your mind whether you want this to be a serious programme or whether you're really Michael Parkinson in disguise.
I don't know how long it took you to think up that before you came to the studio.
Robin Day, obviously, was the great one to begin with, and his problem was his problem with women.
I don't really want to see any newspaper have to compromise itself and pander to the kind of dinosaur sexist instincts of some of, or a majority of readers.
Dinosaur.
Dinosaur sexist instincts.
But the dinosaur is I understand about sexist instinct, but I don't understand what dinosaurs have got to do with it.
He adored women to the extent that he indulged in very elephantine flirting with all of us.
Edna, your idea of a night out?
A night out, a perfect night out.
Yes, it would be to go out with the man I love, who was quite generous and bought some champagne and didn't say, oh, it costs $1.80 a glass, and above all, didn't tell me how much he loved his wife. That would be nice.
When are you free? Is there a lady who would like to ask a question? Because otherwise, if I don't insist on having a lady, I shall get a lot of rude letters. There's a rather lovely one there, yes.
I'd like to...
I'd like to take another question, not unconnected, from Angela de la Nougered, who is a student, and I hope I pronounce your beautiful name correctly.
Thank you, Sir Robin.
Robin was a Liberal candidate in his early days, would very much like to have been a professional politician, but he was very well informed, very sharp, big personality, great fun, a wonderful chairman.
Michael Heseltine?
Well, I go back to what I was saying before.
Oh, well, then we'll have another question. Yes, sir.
I believe that in the USA they have genius classes in some of their public schools. Would it be possible to fit those into our state system?
Genius classes?
Yes. That's what they're called.
Would you have gone into one of those, Neil Kinnock?
Quite possibly. Yes, I was too busy going to the modesty class, actually, to have been able to attend. But
you didn't do very well.
There's no...
Get on with it.
Robin, with great respect to you, a lot of people want to ask a lot of questions. It's a very long statement. I can give a summary, and it's very interesting, so if you bear with me, I'll tell you. Do you know what we did during the revolution? We took away the landowners, the power from the landowners, and gave it to the people.
Going on with Mrs. Curry. Mrs. Curry. Mrs. Curry.
Number one.
Mrs. Curry.
If I may. Number one.
Well, I don't like
Mrs. Curry.
I don't like it.
Mrs. Curry.
Positive.
Would you just keep your mouth shut while Mrs. Curry is speaking? You've had a long turn. We don't want any more nonsense.
Why can't the public be given a general idea of what the spying's been all about?
Can you answer that? Do I not know your face?
Yes, I've had it about 70 years.
That's no reason why I would know it, but have I not seen you before?
My name's Ernie Roberts, and I have been a member of Parliament and a trade union leader.
A Labour Member of Parliament.
Yes,
Thank you for coming this evening. It's very interesting to have your question now.
Instead of being an hour of topical comment and discussion, it's become an hour of belligerent knocking shop.
This programme, sir, is not a knocking shop. I do. Please, Mr. Stephan.
May I not have a reply to this?
If you insist.
But surely I'm one of your guests.
You are. I'm also thinking of the audience who've got some very interesting questions, and one can't balance it like Solomon, but go ahead. What do you see as the issue in this Euro election? Because I've been looking at all the propaganda and I can't quite understand.
Well, I'm very disappointed at that, Robin. You really should come to more of our press conferences. I don't think I've seen you at one of them yet.
Well, I do other work in the morning, and I've read all the literature.
Tomorrow morning, come with me on the 8 o'clock plane.
You have to make a point like that. It isn't a very good reply to a question.
Well, Robin, you did say that you had been looking at the propaganda and you hadn't seen the case. Now, you cannot have read the manifesto. You cannot have looked at the statements that Neil Kinnock, has been making.
I'm asking the question for the benefit of people up in Inverness and Plymouth who haven't read the stuff at all.
That's a perfectly fair question.
Right, well, get on with it.
The answer to that question.
I think a good way of looking at the Question Time presenters is to see them as being a little like the different actors who've played James Bond. So, David Dimbleby, Pierce Brosnan, Peter Sissons, Roger Moore, obviously, Ludwig Kennedy, George Lazenby, and Robin Day has to be Sean Connery.
I'll be in the chair, bloody but unbowed. I hope you'll join us next week. Thank you for watching. Sleep well.
Looking at Question Time from 25 years ago to the present day is rather like a contemporary history lesson with your finger firmly pushed on the fast forward button.
Can the panel seriously commit themselves by saying that the issues at stake are so vital that they are prepared to risk sacrificing their own lives in a war with Argentina?
Do the team agree with Lord Denning's view that the Brighton bombing was an act of treason?
What has got to happen before people stop talking about the Iron Curtain?
Yes, I do think Mrs. Thatcher should have stayed on, because she's one personality that the whole world recognises. You might think that she's quite nasty in her ways, but she still has the charisma.
John Smith was a thoroughly decent man who had such a tremendous sense of fairness, a very Scottish sense of fairness.
Unless a dinosaur evolves, it becomes extinct, and I think New Labour realised that, and I think the Conservatives need to take that on board as well.
In the midst of this carnage, want a harder response provoke more action which will affect innocent lives.
Bearing in mind that no weapons of mass destruction have been found to date, should we still have gone to war with Iraq?
Of all the political issues that have excited the Question Time audience, none has been more powerful than Iraq. We even had one edition in Manchester where instead of the usual 4 or 5 questions, we began with a question on Iraq, and the debate simply ran right through to the end of the programme. There's no doubt that editions of Question Time are at their most compelling when the programme manages to capture public passion. 2 years into his premiership, Tony Blair came into the studio with one of his manifesto pledges apparently conveniently forgotten, but not by the Question Time audience. We've got a few minutes left.
Yes.
Where are you? Yes?
You may remember some time ago that 400 plus MPs voted to ban fox hunting. When will it be banned?
It will be banned. I mean, we'll get the vote to ban it as soon as we possibly can. We had one try at it last session. It was blocked by Conservatives in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and we're looking now at ways of bringing it forward in a future session that allow people to have a vote and actually carry it through.
And 5 years later, it's still not settled. Here is Ken Livingstone infuriating Frank Dobson, Labour's official candidate for Mayor of London, by refusing to declare whether he would stand against him. You've said over and over again, I will not stand as an independent. Everybody here wishes to know whether you will or will not stand by an independent.
Now, I'm sorry, but I'm going to take time with the Labour Party to work out the way forward.
But so you are considering standing?
I'm listening to London.
You're considering standing?
But I'm also making it clear I still want the Labour nomination. I want Labour to wake up to the fact you can't have a system like this.
Well, let me make it clear, Ken. I've made my mind up. I'll say it to your face. I am the official Labour candidate. I am not going to stand down. So, no matter how much you and your... No matter how much you and your friends organise within the Labour Party in London to try to have a go at me about this, I will not change my mind. I will be the official Labour candidate. So as far as I'm concerned, you can say now, are you going to support me or are you going to stand separately? Go on, make my day. Well,
Ken Livingstone duly stood as an independent candidate against Frank Dobson and won. Back in 1981, 4 senior Labour Party members announced that they were going to leave the party because they thought it was moving too far to the left. One of the so-called Gang of 4, David Owen, happened to be on the panel with David Steele, then leader of the Liberals. And remember, this is well before the Gang of 4 had launched their SDP.
Mr. Steele, I understand this is the first occasion on this programme that you've ever had the chance of discussing this matter directly with Dr. Owen. Would you like to take advantage of it?
In recent times, well, I don't propose to conduct a love-in with Dr. Owen on your programme, and certainly not to
I can think of no better place.
And certainly not to live in sin either with him or anybody else. But a marriage is a possibility, which I think we should look towards.
What's your response to that, David Owen?
There's no question of a marriage. There may well be a need for an electoral arrangement whereby you don't fight each other.
No question of an alliance with the Liberal Party?
I think at this stage the only thing that is at issue is how can you work together.
In 2001, just 2 days after the attacks of September the 11th, Question Time mounted a special programme. The BBC apologised for the timing of this edition, in which the audience harried the former American ambassador.
Does the bombing in America represent a failure in US foreign policy, with millions and millions of people all around the world despising the American nation?
Philip Labour.
I'll respond to the last several questions as I respond to you. President Bush has made it clear that once it is determined with certainty who is to blame, that any nation which harbors such individuals shall also be held accountable. We must be reflective on why there are these attitudes towards the United States. But if I may,
let him speak.
But if I may,
he's saying what you're saying.
But
I think. Well, all right.
I'll
bring you in.
May I continue?
If you listen to him, I'll bring you in. All right.
But that is not a justification for any individual around this globe to celebrate what we've seen as the utter disregard for the sanctity of human life.
America, for God's sake, wake up to what you are doing in the Middle East. And when you wake up, then you will solve the problems and you will prevent what happened on Tuesday. And that's the only way really to do that.
Alan Clark got a ticking off from Mrs. Thatcher when he sounded off about her decision on defence procurement.
Margaret Thatcher said she was batting for Britain. Why wasn't she batting for Britain today, when her government awarded the contract for a new missile, not to British Aerospace for their Sea Eagle, but to an American company for their Harpoon missile?
I must admit that I very much regret when a major weapons contract goes outside this country, where the equivalent can be made in England.
Is there anyone here who wishes to defend the government on this, because its minister doesn't?
Claire Short has often spoken her mind. Here she is, castigating Bill Clinton for his involvement with Monica Lewinsky, just at the time that her own boss, Tony Blair, was offering his support.
If he'd been a British Prime Minister, he would have gone. I'm glad to say about our system. It's clear he's not going to go. It's clear he's going to hang on. I think also we're all sick of hearing about it. It kind of pollutes our radios and so on. There's all this messy detail endlessly coming out. He's weakened, and it's very unfortunate to have a weakened President of the United States at a time when the world economy is in the condition it is. But I think he's going to hang on, and then it's up to the American system.
But you prefer him to have gone? You say you were glad under our system he would have gone?
I think a politician that's done that much, told that many lies, isn't really fit to be a leader. But the American people appear to take another view, and he's not going to go, so it's up to them.
Scotland's First Minister Henry McLeish came on when he was under pressure to explain his use of parliamentary expenses.
If I, for a minute, had benefited personally from any of this, then I would have no hesitation in saying that and adopting the consequences, but I clearly didn't.
The man there in the blue shirt, you, sir.
Henry, you're quite a nice chap, and I believe you were a good footballer. For goodness sake, show some integrity, hand in your notice.
And 2 days later, he did just that. Others have fared no better. Tory Foreign Secretary Francis Pym was too candid for Mrs. Thatcher's liking about her prospects in the forthcoming general election.
Yes, does the panel think that if the Tory party gets in with a landslide majority, it will damage the social fabric of the country?
What do you say to that, Francis Pym?
Well, first of all, I think a landslide is unlikely. I think landslides, on the whole, don't produce successful governments. 1945 was the obvious one, this massive landslide to Labour. I think that was extremely unfortunate, so I don't think that's likely to happen.
At the time, I didn't think it was a gaffe at all. It seemed to me a perfectly sensible point to make. Governments do best when they're pressed, when they're under pressure, when things aren't too easy for them. It seemed to me a simply democratic judgment about how Parliament works.
I think that a majority between 50 and 100 would be better than one that was in three figures.
I have a wish to congratulate Andy Davis as an A-level student. It's the first time I've heard anyone elicit from a politician the answer that he doesn't want a landslide victory.
As a result of which, Mrs. Thatcher sacked him outright, no other offers, out of the cabinet. And poor Mr. Pym was consigned to the outer darkness forthwith.
It was to avoid exactly that kind of blunder that few senior cabinet ministers appeared on Question Time in the early days. After all, politicians weren't used to mixing it week by week with their opponents, let alone with the voters.
The view was in the
the 70s is that these sort of programs were best avoided because you could make a mistake, and if you were a senior politician, you made a mistake, it had a big headline. And so the assumption was that you put the second 11 into bat. Well, of course, that's a very curious thing to do when the stakes are so high. We realised that if we were going to be in this business, we ought to put the front foot forward.
They will have made the unemployment figures look better, they will have cut the real living standards of workers and their families, and they will have provided a domestic workforce to look after the elderly people who can no longer get into old people's homes and help.
Is there any truth in that, gentleman delegate?
You must live in a dream world of delirium. I've never heard such. You must have an extraordinary persecution complex. I don't know where you get these ideas from. The idea that a party elected...
The Guardian,
No, The Guardian. No, it's not true. The Guardian is a very accurate and responsible newspaper. It would never go through sort of rubbish of that sort. But the fact that...
Michael Heseltine's experience didn't exactly encourage his colleagues to follow him until a senior Tory decided to press for a change.
Edward Buchan came to see me and said he was going to approach Mrs. Thatcher and say it was important to release cabinet ministers to go on because he felt it was an unequal contest. The so-called heavyweights of the Labour Party were on the programme, but the heavyweights of the Tory Party weren't. It evolved very much when cabinet ministers went on, and that made it, I think, much more significant than it was earlier.
Cabinet and shadow cabinet members now battled it out regularly, but not serving prime ministers. Until 1997, and then only when promised a panel of one. A question from Katie Gent, who's a retired local councillor from Richmond. Katie Gent?
You're known as a decent man, but if returned to power, you will be surrounded by yet more bastards, Portalistas, Redwoodites, etc. Can we have you and not them?
Well, I think I have set out the policies that both I and they are contesting this particular general election on. I certainly hope you're going to have me.
Since then, the main party leaders have regularly appeared in front of the Question Time audience. Not always a comfortable experience. The man with in the spectacles in the centre there.
Mr. Blair,
Yes, sir.
in 1983 in the debate in the House of Commons, you described the Trades Union Act of that year as scandalous and undemocratic. How would you describe that act now?
Well, I've just made it clear. I mean, this is what David and I went through, 10 rounds with the other evening.
So it's no longer undemocratic and designed
No,
to
I've
end
said
the
to
trade
you that
union
what I think is
activity.
important is, and frankly, rather than reading out the old Tory Central Office brief, exercise a bit of imagination yourself. I've already said to you, we will keep the legislation in place.
Undemocratic 14 years ago. Surely it's scandalous and undemocratic
I
now.
perfectly well appreciate why the Conservative Party would prefer to refight the political election campaign of 1983, but I'm on the one in 1987.
Okay, all right. It can be nerve-wracking being a guest on Question Time. You have to be ready at a moment's notice to say something convincing about a question you may not even have thought about. It's no wonder that some guests are almost physically sick in the dressing room before the programme starts. Others are spotted young, give a confident performance, and go on to become regulars.
Question Time is probably the biggest audience many politicians will get, and it's a particularly big deal if you're a backbencher.
I've always found it nerve-wracking. In fact, when I watch it now as a viewer, every time the music comes up, I really get complete terror and my stomach tightens. And I never was able to use Enoch Powell's advice to me. He said, never go to the lavatory. A full bladder gives you the tension for a good performance.
I sometimes wish I got more nervous, because it's the absence of nerves, it's sheer complacency that leads one to forget to read the newspapers on the day and to walk straight into traps like not knowing the identity of this asylum seeker who I'd completely forgotten about.
Do you think it was the correct decision to allow Yusuf al-Qaradawi into the country?
Boris Johnson.
Now this is the guy who was very, very abusive, wasn't he? And full of hate speech of one kind or another.
Yeah.
I can't remember. You've really got me here. I can't remember the exact circumstances of his admission. Presumably he was seeking asylum, wasn't he?
No, he's come here to speak for Brotherhood of Islam.
I'm perplexed as to why he's been welcomed into the bosom of our great nation. I look forward very much to hearing what the Minister for Constitutional Affairs has to say about it.
Yeah. Do you know what the leader of your party says about it?
Since he is a man of fantastic sagacity and judgment, I imagine that he said more or less what I've said.
The worst thing is when nobody on the panel knows what the question is about. And there was one occasion down in Truro in Cornwall with Tony Blair, and the question was an entirely local issue.
I rather wonder if the total number of sewage treatment works in Cornwall would exceed 3.
Is this treated sewage or raw?
No, it's sewage.
Raw sewage.
When I looked up, nobody could answer it. And I did a sort of scan. I could see Tony Blair, for once, looking rather terrified.
Yes,
I just want to say that, of course, it's absolutely disgraceful. I didn't know about St Ives, but of course we must have more sewage treatment plants.
Many years later, we both remembered with horror the time that we went to Truro and none of us knew what that particular question was about.
A panellist, I work out, gets about 6, 7, possibly 8 minutes to talk to that large audience. So you have to take it very, very seriously. And I read all the papers for the week and try and anticipate the questions. Sometimes I had a list of 150 possible questions and I've guessed them all. I don't work out the answers.
At this moment in time, where are the panel coming from with regard to the Plain English Campaign's list of our most annoying phrases?
Tony Benn, the question was, at this moment in time, where are the panel coming from with regard to the Plain English Campaign's list of our most annoying
Well, in the
phrases?
ultimate analysis, when we put it out for consultation, there's absolutely no doubt that we've got to get a level playing field by changing the goalposts so that we can name and shame people into regime changes all over the world. And if we could put that out and bring vulnerable people in the community closer to the community in which they live, then there's no doubt the bottom line would be very much clearer, and I feel that's the way to do it.
It's very good fun, Question Time. Also, it goes out rather late, so you have this feeling that you can kind of go for your shots a bit and say what's on your mind.
What we need to do is to get back to organic methods of production.
All I can say is I go into the shop and I see these organic things, and they cost much more than the other stuff. They're stunted, mouldy little things covered with soil, and I go, there's the other stuff, lovely, luscious, big stuff grown with fertilizer or whatever it is, and I buy it for my children and I feed it to them, and they're jolly healthy.
That you have vast hordes of kids, uncorrected, roaming housing estates, out of control. It's about time somebody did smack them and keep them in at night.
Joe Brand.
Oh, I'd like to give Bernard a bit of a smack for that.
Does the panel think that the lack of any credible opposition since the last election bodes well for democracy in the UK?
Is there a credible opposition?
Not really, no. No, I really won't go to the Lords.
Roy Jenkins claimed that certain members of the Labour Party, in particular reference to members on the GLC, were trying to get control of the police forces in order that they could sort of use political influence on it. And I'd like to know what the panel think.
Alan Taylor, what do you think about this?
To tell you the truth, I don't think anything about it at all.
If everybody who gave on the programme was as honest as that, we'd never have a programme. Just for the money.
No, if you think I'm going to start thinking about this problem, you're very mistaken.
I mean, one of the reasons Arthur Scargill, I suspect, wants a referendum is that he doesn't anyway believe in parliamentary democracy because he is a Marxist.
Yes, I am. I'm a Marxist. The trouble is, Michael Portillo's a Marx and Spencerist, and that's what's getting us into this government.
One does hear of worse cases, real sexual harassment, and I wondered where there is a line to be drawn.
Well,
I suggest you fight
could you
back?
say where you draw the line,
The critical thing to do is fight back. If somebody pinches you on the cheek, pinch them back. If somebody pinches your bottom, pinch theirs. It's amazing what an effect it has.
How far would you go with that?
No, I've said no more.
Well, I don't think you actually see sex on television, do you? You see simulated sex. And they're actors. And it may be distasteful, but I never watch it because I prefer the real thing.
The most electric editions of Question Time are those where two rival panellists allow their political or sometimes their personal antipathy to show through.
If you could find billions for war, find billions for peace and justice. That's what's important.
Arithmetic was never John's strong point. He hasn't. I resign, John. You're very unlikely ever to get a job, aren't you? But let's just put a little fact in front of him because he always finds them embarrassing. The war cost 1.5 billion, and the contributions from overseas are 1.4 billion. So all these billions that are being spent on war only exist in your over-fevered imagination.
The hospital wards. The hospital wards. Tell us about the hospital wards. Can we keep them open?
I'll come back to you. We have a health service on which we're spending more money than any Labour government ever dreamt of spending. It's time, John, you allowed your prejudices to take a back seat and looked at a few facts occasionally, if you could understand them.
No wonder you got sacked.
I didn't get sacked.
Tabloid business is a dying industry. They sell a million less papers than they did 10 years ago. The Daily Mirror is dying even faster than other papers. It's 24% down on sales.
You're dying on your feet, mate. I'd back in if I were you.
They have tried to... Newspapers have tried... The tabloids have tried to blame the Queen for the Paul Burrell fiasco, and it was clearly a fiasco.
David, I've heard enough of this rubbish. Listen...
Well, why don't you leave the room?
I'll tell you what I'd love... I never leave my adoring fans.
When you made the decision that it was right to be non-unilateralist, having been unilateralist all these years, when you made the decision to be a good European, having not been a good European, when you made the decision to give up nationalising, having always been a nationaliser, when you made the decision to do devolution for Scotland, having always been against it, was that on high moral grounds? Or was it because you wanted the votes? And I'm surprised to find how much I'm in agreement with Arthur Scargill. He is a genuine old socialist. He knows what a socialist is. You don't know what a socialist is.
Let him answer. I don't know why I've provoked so much aggression on behalf of a liberal peeress, but let me deal with
not
two
a
of the
peer,
points.
it's a woman peer.
All right, a woman peer. We will deal with two of the points of alleged inconsistency which were alleged at me. Apparently, I've been anti-devolution and have suddenly become devolution.
Well, your party has.
I was actually the minister who carried through the devolution legislation in the last Labour government.
You have. Your
I was
party
supposed.
was.
What would you allow me to answer, please? You're not in the House of Lords now. You're in a place where you have to listen to other people.
As Vice Chairman of Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, and also currently as wife of the hospital orderly at North Sea Camp Prison. I think I see the health service in the round.
Oh, yes, of course, those two examples.
The need for...
That would cover it.
The need...
I was slightly surprised Mary Archer had agreed to go on a panel with me anyway. But when it came to it, I think she just thought everybody, and that included me, would be too polite to mention the fact that their husband had been involved in a number of extremely sleazy affairs during his time. I think people have a memory of the major years sleaze being absolutely fantastic, you know, top-rate sleaze. There were liars, obviously. There was perjurers. We had Jonathan Aitken and Geoffrey. And, you know, that's sleaze. Anything contentious there?
Like to take another free kick while you're at it?
Well, this is a public programme, and you've appeared on the panel. And I think you're most famous for being Geoffrey's wife. The Prime Minister, his first response, when everyone says you're sleazy, he says, look at all the Tories there in jail. Your husband is the reason that Tony Blair gets away with it in Parliament. That, I think, we have to take into consideration. She was jolly angry with me. And I had a harangue afterwards, saying that, you know, I'd been incredibly rude and she'd done nothing to merit that sort of treatment. And then, in the end, she said, well, you know, what do you think I should do? And I said, stay at home.
I find it quite extraordinary that a politician of Mr. Heath's experience should be so ready to find life with Saddam Hussein tolerable.
I'm not saying that for one moment. Having met President Saddam Hussein, which you haven't done, I know perfectly well what he's like. All you've done is sit in your office and demand a war every day since August the 2nd.
What do you believe, let me finish, meeting Saddam Hussein has taught you about him that the rest of us don't know?
A great deal. And it really is disgraceful you should make such an accusation in public like this.
It's true. You're taking it down to 14, and that would really worry me. I'd be firmer on 18 and leave it there.
When I listen to Geoffrey preaching the eternal compromise of 18,
yes,
I think of the remark that I make to my students. Why do Englishmen like sitting on the fence so much? Because they enjoy the sensation, Geoffrey. There is no grounds in reason or logic or justice for 18.
I enjoyed the very clever way you got a laugh, David. I'm bound to say to you, I was not sitting on the fence and I was not compromising. 18 is what I feel, and 18 is what I believe. And you don't have the right to doubt my beliefs and think just because you're an expert in this subject, I don't have the right to say what I feel or get a cheap laugh out of it. I stand by 18 and I mean it.
What he is saying to me is that I would have been right to have stayed and spoken in favour of policies coming out of Europe, destroying NATO, massive nationalisation, destruction of any private education, any private health service, moving towards a semi-East European state. That would have been all right within the tabernacle of the Labour Party.
I mean, I'll be blunt with you, Roy. You talk about cancer. I feel very strongly about people whose entire life depends on the working class movement. Your father was a miner. He was in jail in the general strike. You got into Parliament as a Labour member. Every office you held was because of the Labour Party. Cabinet Minister, appointed by a Labour Prime Minister, and then you left the party. Now that's a cancerous growth. Not personally, but I think people who betray those who gave them power are the real threat. And I must say that bluntly to you because I think that needs to be said. Now, having said that,
You think you're promising us Derek Hatton being leader of the Labour
I'm not.
Party?
I'm only saying, Roy, that the people that stay true to those who put them in power, these are the people I admire, not the people who climb into power on the backs of others, kick away the ladder, and are presented by everybody as men of principle and moderate.
Why is it always millionaires like yourself get uptight about £2 an hour for people on minimum wage? Why do you always have to do that?
I'll tell you. Because I know something about actually creating jobs as opposed to just talking about it.
You've obviously done a lot better than your workers have.
Yes. Yeah, but in fact created a large number of jobs in the process.
Not at £2 an hour.
Now, you just tell the people in
Is
this country...
£2 an hour acceptable to you?
You know perfectly well that what you're talking about is £4 and 8p an hour as the minimum wage.
Is £2 an hour acceptable to you as a very wealthy man?
It is nothing to do with me being a wealthy man. Well, what you're trying
is it acceptable £2 an hour?
It is entirely a matter of what people are prepared to accept in the circumstances of getting a job.
And sometimes even the chairman gets dragged in.
Why did the Conservatives support the accession of the 10 countries? Those countries can feel let down because now you're getting scared of the natural consequence of these being full members. And I'm saying to you, you've got nothing to fear.
Please, I know, but don't speak while he's speaking because nobody can hear anybody. You always tell other people. You always tell other people.
No, just now, when Shirley had finished, you told me not to interrupt, and she finished.
You always tell people.
I just jumped in while I got the opportunity. Transitional period.
You won't win this one because I'm chairing the programme.
Oh, I know.
And you won't win if you could speak when other people aren't speaking and not interrupt those who are.
Period.
Then the same courtesy may be extended to you.
The terrible risk of appearing on television is that what you say is recorded and can be kept in evidence against you. Here are a few things that panellists have said which, with hindsight, they might rather have wished they hadn't.
Every independent expert who has looked at the minimum wage has come to the conclusion that it would destroy large numbers of jobs. And the ridiculous thing about it is that it wouldn't even help the people it's designed to help. The minimum wage would actually help the richest third of the population more than it would help the poorest third. This is an absolutely disastrous policy. It's utterly misconceived, and the sooner the Labour Party withdraw it, the better for everyone in our country.
I believe it's misconceived. I believe it has its origin in the desire of the Labour Party to try and offer something to the trade unions. The consequences for the rest of the workforce will far outweigh any benefit which might accrue from the minimum wage proposal.
I think that you will find, when the community charge has been in for some time, that all the fuss that has been created around it will disappear very, very largely. And in a couple of years' time, people are going to be quite used to the community charge, and I think that they won't understand what all this fuss was about.
My hope would be that, in fact, John Major, for whom all of us have the greatest respect, and who worked with Nigel for a long time, will be able to do as good a job. I think he will. And I think his position is made a great deal easier by the fact that Alan Waters has gone. He's left him with a clear
is his position made stronger? Because, after all, if she were to lose, I think someone pointed out tonight, 2 chancellors in a row, her own position could be untenable. Perhaps John Major is in a stronger position than any chancellor has been for a number of years.
Well, that could well be, and he is as tough as old boots as John Major as well. So I think he may surprise people a little bit.
I don't feel a great sense of pressure that I should suddenly be resigning, because what I have said solemnly to the House of Commons, I think, will be shown to be correct.
Our perception of the United Nations and the role of the United Nations has changed a very great deal. I mean, many people previously, people in fact from my own political persuasion, would not have wanted intervention either by the United Nations or others. And yet increasingly now we see ourselves drawn in to these conflicts, whether it's in Somalia or former Yugoslavia or indeed in Iraq. What I think is necessary, however, is if we are going to give this new potency to the United Nations, it has to be more than simply the United States and Britain and France and 1 or 2 other countries. It has to be a real forum for world opinion, which can be mobilised effectively and which acts always under the aegis of international law, so that the power of the United Nations is never subverted simply to the power of 1 or 2 countries.
And that ends this look back over 25 years of Question Time. The next edition of Question Time, next Thursday. I hope you'll join us for it. But just before we go, a few moments that everyone, panellists, audience and chairman, might rather forget.
Somebody forgot to put a shilling in the meter. It'll be all right in a minute. What you call self-government, but what he calls devolution, up in this relatively small corner of the United Kingdom.
I beg your pardon?
This reminds me of 1985, when Mrs. Thatcher had Alan Walters underneath the table in number 10 Downing Street. Disagree.
Do you want to rephrase that?
I happen to not like beards or moustaches.
And the fact that you use a single set of wires to transmit the electricity.
A Freudian slip. We could stand you a lunch, Cyril. At least I think we could stand you a lunch. You haven't seen my lot.
What does the team think of the common market proposal to ration alcohol?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with this. This has just come on.
Wendy Mantle.
I'm afraid I knew nothing about it at all. Perhaps Robin can enlighten us.
Julian Avery.
Well, I'm against it on principle.
This is Dorothy Clark, housewife. Are you there?
Which question?
You had a short one, I think, about what about the team and their...
About the beer?
About the what?
Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing, aren't I?
No. You just ask whatever you like to ask, but not a long political question. You had one at the end, I think I remembered. You had two or three. I thought you wanted to ask her one. How are you doing there? What have you got in that handbag? Well, while you're waiting, I'll tell you what it was. It was, what does the team like doing on a night out?
What does the team
Yes, we've got that.
No, it's not permissible. It's 77%. Is that right? 19% it's occasionally permissible.
What a wet one, it's not wrong.
What was it I asked? What?
The answer is no, it is not wrong in all circumstances.
No, it is not wrong. Thank you very much. Well, excellent, good. Well, it's a very interesting result.
Remember the point of the question? Instead of a...
Can you remember it?
Yes, I can remember it very well. I want to get it right.
Got it written in front of you.
Well, of course.
You don't create jobs by pouring money into silly things. Indeed, if you tax successful firms...
What was a silly thing that the GLC put its money in so far as job creation was concerned?
And I said what? I can't remember.
Yeah, you can't remember.
The probability of a I was going to say Kinnersley haddock.
I think Simon is right. Peter, I'm sorry. Peter is right. You're right, whoever you are.
You, sir. You, ma'am.
Sir.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Helleth Williams.
Miss.
That's all right. Miss, I'm so sorry. It says Mr. here, but you certainly, it's not a mistake
to give him Welsh lessons for you.
That's in the front.
My suggestion, Robin, it's about time you took advantage of the free eyesight test yourself. That's the second sex mistake you've made tonight.
Would you like to stand up? And I'll take a poll of the audience.
Is it John Gregg?
No, it's John Ord.
John Ord. John Ord, I beg your pardon. Your writing is very small.
It is pretty awful, isn't it?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn Messenger. Mr. Glenn, I'm sorry. I've got his name right. I've mixed up your name with your occupation.
Read by the doctor. And paid £45 for it. Robin Cook, sorry. Should you think that... do you think that's proper?
Yes, David Bumblebee.
What action do the panel think should be taken against press photographers who take pictures of the royal family?
Such as the pregnant Princess Anne?
Yes.
And presumably you don't limit only to the royal family, do you?
Yes.
What did I say? The Princess of Wales, but I've no doubt the same principle applies, if not the same
Since Gordon Brown became Prime Minister,